Hello, personal productivity enthusiasts and community. Welcome to Anything But Idle, the productivity news and commentary podcast. Today's show is brought to you by W3C Web Services. I'm Ray Sidney-Smith.
And I'm Augusto Pinaud.
And we're your hosts for Anything But Idle. This is episode 33. Salesforce buys Slack for 27 billion USD, and we're recording this on December 7th, 2020. Each week, we cover and discuss the productivity news and technology news headlines of the week. And each week, we bring two panelists with us onto the show to talk about all things in the personal productivity and technology space. Today, we have Dr. Frank Buck, who makes organization easy so you can increase productivity, decrease stress, and enjoy life. Global Gurus has ranked Dr. Buck as #1 in the world in the time management category for both 2019 and 2020. From band director to principal to central office administrator, and now to productivity coach and speaker. Welcome to Anything But Idle, Dr. Buck.
All right, Ray, Augusto, it's good to be with you this evening. Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome back.
Absolutely. Next up, we have Francis Wade. Francis Wade is the author of Perfect Time-Based Productivity and the host of the upcoming Task Management and Time Blocking Virtual Summit in March 2020. He has lived in Kingston, Jamaica since 2005 and is an avid content creator, newspaper columnist, and cyclist. Welcome to Anything But Idle, Francis.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Great to have you all here. And this week, I wanted to have a little bit of discussion around our theme this week. Each week, we just start off conversation with a little bit of a theme. And this week, what I wanted to do is talk about reflecting on 2020 and planning for 2021. And I'm just curious about what are your biggest reflections on the impact on productivity that 2020 had on all of us, not just from the perspective of the pandemic and how it really has changed the global workforce and all those things, but really what things should we be thinking about in terms of reflecting on 2020 and how can we plan for a better 2021? Who wants to kick us off in terms of conversation there?
I think 2020 was a reaction year, a year of surviving, scraping through, barely holding things together. And I think productivity took a backseat to doing whatever I need to do to survive and make it through the year. And I think 2021 is going to be a bit of a backlash, frontlash, but whiplash. But it's going to be a bit of the opposite. I think people are going to settle down, realize that most of us aren't going to die or anything. We're actually going to make it through. And given that we're going to make it through, are we going to go back to what we had before? Or are we going to go to something better? And that's going to require some thinking. So I think we're going to go back to thinking. I don't think this was a year of thinking or even trying to be productive, but I think next year will be.
Yeah. Now, for me, with sort of everything shut down and so many things being canceled, it was suddenly the gift of time that I was home, doing whatever it was that I wanted to do. And I was able to undertake some projects that maybe I wouldn't have been able to undertake before. So many things where I would have gotten in the car and driven an hour or two or gotten on an airplane and spent 2 days engaged in turned out to be something done online in an hour or 2 hours. So, we're just doing the best with the hand that's dealt us. But personally, I don't feel the worse for wear.
Likewise, I have to say that this year was definitely a weird year for me. In reflecting on it, I got more done this year because I wasn't traveling and had more time. At the same time, work for me and just the nature of and the industry that I'm in sped up exponentially. I mean, there's just a deluge of new work that landed on my plate, and that required me to have to do that. So in terms of reflecting on 2020, I think it's really important for us all to take stock in really what things worked this year, what things didn't work this year, and what things going forward into 2021 are going to work for you in a state of flux. We're going to be in this state for at least another 6 months, potentially 9 months more. And we need to be able to be, like I know I keep saying this throughout the year, flexible, dynamic. We have to be adaptive in this environment. And so what are those parts of your productivity system that are currently doing that? What parts are working well and which parts are not? And can you rise to the occasion of kind of fixing those pieces that are not working for you and that are maybe a little too rigid, or maybe are missing. Maybe there's like a missing productivity system that can be implemented to bridge the gap there. And I think that's the part that I want to really hone in for everyone, is in this reflection time where we're coming to the close of 2020, the calendar year. You should really be thinking about next year and how you can, really bridge those gaps and say, okay, these parts are bad for me this year. I had a huge gap in my financial management, or I had a huge gap in my task management, or I had a huge gap in my family management. How can we level up in those ways? And we're all productivity enthusiasts here, right? We know what it's like to be productive in an environment. And I think now is the time to be thinking about those things, which is why I wanted to bring up the topic.
But I think it's really important also to start with what worked well, because this was an anomaly year, and it has a year that has had really marked periods in which we start at the beginning of the year with, okay, great, all these great things are going to happen, and suddenly, what's going to happen here? Oh, we're going to be closed, not closed. So acknowledge that this is not a traditional year. This is a year who has had periods. We are not going to go remote, then we are going to go remote, but we are going to only go for weeks, and now we are going to be God knows when. So take all that uncertainty also plays a role. For a lot of people, it was not only going to home, it was going to home to have now the kids to be, part educator, part parent, part worker. Okay. There was a significant amount of variables that were thrown at you. So it's not only, the work that you used to do or the activities that you used to do. It's really everyone who is on your close or semi-close circle needed to adjust those realities and how you interact with those realities, from the people who travel a lot to the people who didn't travel. I said, I set up to be on my home office 9 years ago, but the reality is that I set up to send people away so I could work quietly, okay? That is not how 2020 performed. So that part is really, really important. Art is saying in there, do not strategize based on this year, but strategize for another like this year. And I think that is really, really key. We don't know what is going to be 2021, or at least I will not be, don't have the courage to make a bet on what is going to be 2021, but we know it's going to be different than 2019. And there is a lot of things we all have learned from the productivity standpoint, from efficiency standpoint, from family standpoint. So take into consideration, really important, what didn't work, what worked, and what you're going to do to make it work, to make sure you keep what is working, and adjust or fix what has not worked. But it's that part. As a coach, I see so many people, I'm going to change all these things, ignoring to make sure that the things that are working, they identify first the things that are working before they change everything else.
Wonderful. And so let's get into our stories this week. What is our first headline of the week, Augusto? You are muted. That's like one official every show.
There need to be at least one every show. Okay, that happen everywhere. Is part of the things we don't do well in 2020.
Okay, first headline.
So the first one is Amazon Sidewalk, and we've been reading and listening about all these projects about make the internet available for everybody, and Amazon is taking their shot at it, basically getting their Echoes and their Rings and their other devices to be that hotspot so we can have internet available everywhere. And they announced this September 2019, and we know what happened in the means between this and now, but now they're finally getting back to, okay, let's start implementing this Wi-Fi network, and they're trying to sell, what are going to be the benefits, and also this article talk about the downside. So what do you guys think about this sidewalk? What do you guys think about giving access to your Wi-Fi to whoever passed in front of you, as you can get Wi-Fi to whoever house you pass in front of.
So let's clarify this for everybody. This is a smart neighborhood infrastructure piece that Amazon is rolling out. The idea behind Amazon Sidewalk is that it's a new type of wireless network. In essence, it is a low data. So they're running this across the 900 megahertz band, along with a little bit of Bluetooth low energy, to be able to connect mostly smart devices. So your Amazon Ring, other kinds of Echo devices and whatnot are basically connected in this way. It says that it can have a range up to about a half mile. And in essence, you are sharing this network with all of the other people who are connected to what they call the Sidewalk Bridge. And this is the platform within Amazon Sidewalk that gives your account, your Amazon account, and those devices access to this network. So in essence, as Augusto said, you're basically sharing this network connectivity among your neighbors. So and anyone who comes into contact with your connectivity, in essence. So say if your dog has a tile on them, for tracking them, potentially that tile can be picked up by Amazon Sidewalk, but you're also sharing that data now with the Amazon Sidewalk network. And who really has access to that information aside from Amazon? And what does that really mean? And so there's a bunch of security implications there and privacy implications there as well.
Well, sounds good in theory.
I don't know. It sounds scary to me. I don't.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting concept, and I think just the security, the privacy concerns. I think the average person is already a little suspicious of who is seeing and finding out about them, whatever it may be. Even though they're not doing anything bad, it's just the principle of the thing that I want my privacy.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, I think that I'm going to deactivate Sidewalk as soon as it shows up in my system, for no other reason than the fact that it is currently, they're basically beta testing this technology out, and I would really not like to be in that first round of connectivity. I'd like to see once it kind of it's going to have issues. There's no question. They're trying to push the envelope on this. I don't particularly feel like you, Frank. I don't feel like this is like, big bad, technology giant trying to somehow do something wrong. But at the same time, I don't want to be their guinea pig in making this happen. I don't want to be their lab rat. So the system is opt-out. So you're automatically added in as soon as one of your devices is made available. So I'm going to opt out, and you'll just see the options. So you go to, in your Amazon Alexa app, you'll just go to settings, account settings, Amazon Sidewalk, and then you can go ahead and disable it. But know that if you do have an Amazon Ring or a number of those devices, you're going to be automatically enrolled in it. Art is noting here, who does it benefit? Me or Amazon? And I would imagine that this probably has a kind of a combination of benefits. I mean, the reality is that some people have really poor connectivity. And now if you have, say, a wireless camera, like one of those Amazon cameras way out on your property, I don't have a large tract of land, but some people do. And so if it's way out there and that's near a neighbor's connection, that's going to reconnect your Amazon camera and give you greater connectivity further away from, say, your home or Wi-Fi, true Wi-Fi network, as opposed to the Amazon Sidewalk Bridge. So I feel like there are some trade-offs here, of course, but there can be benefits here in being able to extend this network, especially if a lot of people have it. I mean, this is a traditional mesh network. I'm sorry, this is a non-traditional mesh network, right? Because we're using other bandwidth protocols, other communication protocols other than just normal Wi-Fi. But it's basically the same concept. The real problem, though, is that you're really connecting to people you don't necessarily know or trust. And so how do you do this in a trustless environment is really kind of the main issue. But just know that it's coming. All right, let's take on.
I think we have an issue. Given that we have an issue wearing masks, I don't think, and that requires a certain level of cooperation just so that we don't make each other sick. I doubt that the level of cooperation required.
Oh, when you put it that way, then people will do it, no issues. You're climbing to common sense, and so let's go to Amazon Kindle now has common sense and increase our storage to 8 GB instead of 4. The Kindle introduced, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 years ago where they introduced the ability to download on your Kindle Audible books, and some people with the 4 GB start having issues now because the audiobooks take a lot more, and Amazon trained us that 4 GB on ebooks was so much that you can download them forever and never think about delete them. As soon as you start putting the audiobooks, oops, now you don't fit. So Amazon came and double the internal capacity of the Kindle, the reader, from 4 GB to 8 GB, and I think that's really nice.
Yes. Yeah, so just a couple of things. Some folks in the States will see 8 GB models, 8 gigabit models when you purchase them. Some people will still see the 4 gigabit models. So this seems to be mixed. Presumably they're moving through their older inventory, and then everybody will get 8 gigs going forward. I am really sad because I just got a new Kindle and mine is the 4 gigabit version. And so I will likely be upgrading very soon because, you could trade it in. You can just do the Amazon Kindle trade-in program. If you don't know, there's a trade-in program. You can just trade it in. So I will be trading it in immediately for as soon as I'm able to for the 8 gigabit version. So I'm going to give it a few months to make sure that they're all 8 gigabit models and then upgrading to that, because there's just no reason not to get double the storage and a much longer longevity out of your device by virtue of having the larger storage capacity. So good on Amazon for doing that. Next up, Augusto, what's our next story?
We're still in Amazon, and it's unusual we get that many. So Amazon is rolling out the Type with Alexa feature for the iOS, and basically now you will be able to start doing searches and stuff looking directly with Alexa. Text them using all the full device that you can use. You can type to Siri and do a bunch of things. So it's for people who speak a second language, or at least the English is their second language. It is interesting how different it is to talk to Google or to the big A or to talk to Siri. So having the multiples and it change. I this is hard to explain when this is your second language. The quality of your pronunciation, enunciation, and the language, as you get tired, gets worse and worse and worse. So you need to change the technology. In the morning, Siri understands me much better than in the afternoon where I'm tired, that I need to stop using Siri, basically. So I'm pretty excited about having this and being able to search within the app, search the routine, the home devices. So I am really, really excited about it, as our house have many of these things around.
Yeah, and I think this is really great for a whole bunch of other circumstances. Case in point, obviously, people who are multilingual, but also, if you are in an environment where sound is an issue, say you have loud music playing, you're outside in the yard, and you have your phone, but the Echo device can't hear you, you can go ahead and now type into it. Or the kids are sleeping, a spouse or partner is sleeping, you can go ahead and type messages for things to be executed without you disturbing those folks. Or the kids are playing.
Oh, I have not thought about that. That's a cool use.
Yeah, that was a big thing for me originally with the Google Assistant. And then as soon as I realized that I could open up the Google Assistant application and type into it what I wanted, that removed that barrier of having to say something out loud and wake people in the household, because I have a big booming voice, so it turns out, inside of my house. And everybody tells me that. So I try to be just quieter when I do those things, but I am fairly commanding when I speak to the assistant, because it's the assistant. I want it to do what I say, and if I don't say it in a commanding voice, it won't do it. So I like the idea that I can type to it more often than not, as opposed to disturbing others with executing things. And so that's a really good addition to the Amazon Alexa app. Moving right along.
Our next news is Apple released their MagSafe Duo charger when they announced their new iPhones, and we cover on the Anything But Idle special edition with Michael Zielinski. We couple the whole thing, but they talk about the MagSafe Duo. And basically, it's a little mat that can charge your phone and your watch, and using the new MagSafe charger. So it was a really cool to see it here coming. Finally, it's out. It's $129. So if you have the new device or you were waiting for this, go for it. It's ready for you.
Yeah, so my understanding here is that it can charge an iPhone and then another Qi certified device simultaneously. And so that's what I've heard. There's been some obvious reviews that I've read that basically say it is what you're getting, right? $129 USD, and all it does is charge one device plus another. And so the, overpriced, expensive, for me, sounds just like Apple Premium, but I think a lot of people expected it to do more for it. Plus, you have to shell out another $20 in order to buy the power adapter to charge the thing. So this whole notion that Apple is using for kind of environmental purposes is they're basically saying we're not putting adapters into the boxes of our devices to be able to save in environmental cost, that is environmental impact. But at the same time, people who don't have adapters for these devices now have to basically buy them if they don't have them, and that's going to cost more money for folks. So I think it's great. I mean, they should be adding more products into the MagSafe space now that they have the features on the iPhone 12. But at the same time, it's kind of a weird reality for folks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, what's the speed? Do you need as far as how long it takes to charge, laying it on this as opposed to plugging it in?
The theory is that if you put it in here, it will charge around the same time that you have the cable. It's just the version of the Qi charger. But as I think that to Apple, okay, they now came back the MagSafe, and instead of make it as it was, they add a little magnet so your phone doesn't move. So when you put it in there, it charged. That the old charger didn't have that. So we have an old one that you need to pay attention if it's charging or not. Now they put a little magnet, so for sure it's charging. But in theory, it charged on the same speed as the regular cable does.
Okay.
All right, moving right along, more Apple news.
Well, the next article is about the top share and downloaded apps in 2020, and obviously we will cover the Googles, we will cover the Amazon, the Apple. But it was interesting to see some of these apps. Obviously, the Zoom was obviously one of the most, TikTok, and but what impressed me the most was on the top paid games was Plague Inc. Okay, that for a year of pandemic, okay, that the game most downloaded, or one of the game most downloaded, was Plague. It was like, I had Plague. I'm not saying it was a really fun game in 2018-19, not as fun in 2020. That part honestly shocked me that was one of the top games for this year.
Well, for me, when you look at the top free charts and the top paid charts of the apps themselves, not the games, I think from a productivity perspective, it's weird for me because number one is Zoom. That makes total sense. Zoom is a productivity tool that we've all been using, and Zoom became a verb this year. People are going to Zoom with each other, and but at the same time, down in 8 or 9. We get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, 9th place is Gmail. So our first productivity app comes out in number 9 in the free tier, which just seemed shocking to me. Not a single task management or project management application shows up in the top free charts. So that's just something to kind of pay attention to. It's not until we get down to Google Meet in last place. Is this a 15 top free list? Yeah, 15. So in 15th place is Google Meet, Google, and then Google Meet in 14th and 15th place. So Google shows up, of course, though, 4 times in the top 15. And of course, Facebook shows up Google shows up 5 times. YouTube, Gmail, Google Maps, Google, and Google Meet. So they're not slacking off on the iOS platform. Google is clearly still dominating in a lot of these ways. Amazon shopping shows up there, but then of course Facebook shows up multiple times as well. Instagram, Facebook, and Messenger. So and WhatsApp. I'm sorry, WhatsApp as well. So they are definitely you can see that the tech giants still command in the free space most of the exposure. Not a single Microsoft product, which is kind of interesting that we don't see any Microsoft products on the top 15 list. I would have thought maybe something would have creeped in. Not sure what, but I just thought maybe something would have creeped in. On the paid side, what I thought was really interesting is that Forest showed up. It comes in at probably the same 8 or 9 numbered space. And Forest is an application that you basically use it to stay focused, right? It's in the title, Forest, stay focused. And it's a game where you actually play it, and the more you stay focused on a task, the more your forest grows. And so this is a way for you to actually train yourself to focus. And I know a lot of folks who use it and appreciate using it, but that's kind of the only productivity, what I would consider productivity focused tool that showed up on the list in this paid list and in both top 15 lists this year. So something to kind of pay attention to.
Well, Ray, do you think maybe that, say, with the productivity apps that people have already got theirs, they didn't download it because they're already using Remember the Milk, they're already using Todoist, they're already using Evernote. And of course, there are a lot of people out there that are selling you a paper planner or 4 paper planners a year, that you have to buy one for every 90 days.
Yeah, I think it's a part of what you're talking about, and the other side is that these lists are somewhat neutered. The reality is that Apple is choosing these top lists for their own reasons. I mean, these aren't the top of, they basically decide the statistics that choose these top apps, right? So who knows how they choose these as their top apps? It's not just probably by downloads. They know the ones that make them the most money, and so they probably give a little bit more credence to those, and so on and so forth. So, I'm not particularly, not to be like conspiracy theorist here, but I think that they probably position these to be more in line with what's going to be valuable to them more, right? Like Hot Schedules shows up as number 4 on the top paid chart. Have you ever heard of Hot Schedules? I haven't, but it's an employee scheduling tool. And of course, it's probably going to make them a lot of money by having put it in the top 4, and more employers recognizing that Hot Schedules exists and being like, oh, you know what? We have a problem with employee scheduling and communicating with our staff around schedules. We should use this tool. It's in the top 4 for 2020, right? So this is a great opportunity for them to make some money. So I see that as the likely reason for it.
Well, that is true, and you get a lot of traffic for that too. There was an article recently from our friend Mike Zielinski talking about how when Nosby got into the top list, not the top 20 for the year, but the top app, or the app of the day was what it was. He shared graciously, all the data and or some of the data that he got and how much traffic he got. That is really, really interesting how much traffic he got from that.
Absolutely. All right, moving right along from the top 20 list to Telegram. Telegram has a new beta feature out. Augusto, you want to tell us about it?
Yes. Telegram in beta right now, it's the first third-party app to use the announced messages with Siri. So Siri, when you are wearing the Apple AirPods, the Pro or the non-Pro, and you get a text message or an iMessage, I should say, Siri has the ability to read it. That is really convenient. You are listening and you get ting ting, and it reads you the text message. And again, for a person who speaks multiple languages, that doesn't work every time. As Siri don't yet read it in the proper language, read it in English. So when you get them in Spanish, it's kind of confusing. But Telegram now will have that. For me, that's awesome. I'm so excited about it because I use that feature a lot, and it's really convenient to listen the message but don't need to move, open the thing. Yes, I get it that you get distraction, but you only go and respond. You know what the message is and decide, no, I'm not taking right now care of that, or yes, I will. So I'm, for one, super excited about this little feature.
Yeah, so understand that Telegram is in probably second or third place in numbers. I mean, WhatsApp has 2 billion users worldwide. Telegram has probably around 400 million, but they will continue to eke up in terms of numbers. I've seen more and more people taking on Telegram. I feel like I have impacted at least 1 million of those because I just tell everybody how wonderful Telegram is. And but Telegram is beta testing this in Test Flight, which is the Apple test application, beta testing application. This is only available, the feature called Announce Messages with Siri is only available for iPods, iPods Pro, Powerbeats, Powerbeats Pro, and Beats Solo Pro. So it's only going to support those 5 tools, those 5 headphones so far. You have to be running iOS 13.2 or later for you to be able to get that feature. So over time, I'm presuming they'll support more headphones and more devices, but right now they're only supporting those. But I think this is just great. I mean, I love being able to, with my Google Pixel Buds, I'm able to, have that kind of fluid conversation with Google Assistant to be able to respond back to messages as they're coming in. And it's just nice to be able to, answer a message by voice and then go on with your day. So very good there.
I can't imagine the hell that would be for me. I get too many messages. I couldn't get anything else done other than replying to messages if I were to have that.
So it's sort of like this little voice in your head all the time.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, you can actually disable that or even reduce the notifications so that you're not getting them constantly. For me, I don't get overburdened by it. I did turn on the email for important email so that I get those notifications in my ears, and that's been actually quite convenient for me to be able to respond to those most important messages so that I'm getting responses back, especially since they're usually 1 or 2 word responses. I'm not trying to write a book via voice response, and it's been pretty good at being able to do the voice transcription where it's actually putting in punctuation and getting the thoughts out in clear text. So I've been pretty pleased with it. Most of it is 1 sentence, 2 sentence responses and not particularly difficult for them to say. Art is noting here, 1 more voice in his head. I love the voice in my head, so I don't have any problem with that.
Put me on your preferred list, please. Thanks.
All right. Moving on to an article that was on the Trello blog that I thought was really well done. And so the article is weird because it's called What Astronauts and Submariners Can Teach Us About the Necessity of Team Routines. And what they're talking about here is the structure of creating routines in the face of what is changing environment, an uncertain environment, and really being able to put in place structure, redundancy, repetitiveness, and therefore reducing anxiety that people might have in team environments. And so they're talking about some experiments, some studies that were done on teams of people in submarines as well as people on the space station and so on and so forth. And they come away, I think, with some interesting components here. One is that structure, like routines, reduces anxiety. And this is well understood, and I'm glad to see them talking about that. They talk about habits and routine, and they somewhat try to define habits, routine, and ritual in the article. And I thought this was a bit muddy for me because I particularly don't like that. But the idea here is that they talk about habits, and which of course is a repetitive behavior that becomes automatic over time, or is automatic in some way, shape, or form. What they call in psychology is automaticity. So it just happens naturally by virtue of a cue. They talk about a routine as something that lacks a cue, but is a series of repetitive behaviors, and they call those habits. I don't particularly define a routine as a set of habits, but they are a set of repetitive behaviors that happens in sequence. So I somewhat disagree there, and maybe I'm disagreeing with the scientists that define routines, but I disagree with that notion just generally. We can call it habit stacking if you want to talk about a series of habits strung together, but I don't see routine as necessitating habits. Routines can be non-habitual and still be useful. Look at a checklist, right? A checklist is can be a routine. You can do the things in a checklist that doesn't require it to be habitual, and you can still do them as a sequence of tasks in a row. So I don't see that. Then they talk about rituals, and they say that rituals are basically a routine with some quote unquote deeper meaning. And again, like I said, I don't particularly like to add this to conflate the scientific piece with the spiritual piece. If you want to have a ritual, and I see that as more being a spiritual thing, and that should be in the spiritual category. So a ritual is great if you want to have a ritual that's spiritual to me. I just don't see that as a routine. So I see the notion of having a routine with a deeper meaning. That to me just calls like that's a celebration. It doesn't seem to me to need to be like prayer is a ritual, and that's fine. But it doesn't sound like a routine to me in the productivity space, and I just don't like the conflating of those terms generally. Anyway, anything that stood out for you in the article, and any thoughts you have on the article?
Yeah, but I agree with what you said, and I can set as an example my travel checklist. I have not used it this year. No, that's not true. I used it this year, but at the beginning, but it is still a ritual. It is what I do every time, and it's not necessarily to have consistency. I agree with you. I also enjoy a lot the article. So.
Mhm.
Yeah, so they give 5 routine items just as a quick run through for everybody. They talk about building good habits with a Trello daily habit tracker. Of course, it's on the Trello blog, so they're going to feature Trello product. But I think these are still useful. They kind of they have a daily habit tracker that they call it. They have something for teams to have an ideal project workflow. Then they have establishing a weekly review. And they say ritual here, but that would be a retrospective, not a ritual. They say also known as a retrospective, but it's just really just known as a retrospective. So I don't know why they are trying to continue to conflate things. They talk about hosting monthly all hands meetings and scheduling regular one-to-one meetings with your colleagues. And again, this is all about establishing routines so that in the face of uncertain times, you're capable of really having a set of structural components to provide predictability, and then of course reducing anxiety, because people are more productive when they have reduced anxiety, which of course means psychological safety, right? You feel mentally safe to be able to risk and seek out new areas, to be curious, and all those other kinds of things. So just good to see that written out in a mostly good way. I mean, they got a couple pieces there that I don't particularly disagree with, but I think for the most part the article provided a pretty good foundation there. Art is noting a ritual results in completion of actions and the establishment of a state of mind. And again, I just don't like the term ritual in productivity. I think that we should separate those pieces, but sure, whatever. I'll keep beating that dead horse.
I did not read that particular article, but to me, the whole thing sort of revolves around on the front end making some decisions about what you want to happen. And I think with these routines, we're probably looking at more daily things that you're doing, although it could be weekly, it could be monthly, it could be yearly, but just making decisions about what you want the future to look like, what things need to happen on a regular basis for life to be better for you, and then just building those into a system that makes it happen. So whether it's a daily repeating task, or a daily repeating set of tasks, or a weekly repeating set of tasks, and you're not having to do that thinking every day.
Absolutely. All right, moving right along, some new news about Evernote. As all of you know, I can not in full disclosure, but in just so that people know, I am an Evernote certified consultant and one of the Evernote regional leaders for North America. And actually, Dr. Buck is a fellow Evernote certified consultant. And
yes.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And so Evernote just released Evernote for Android, the new Evernote for Android. And so you should start seeing this rolling out on certain devices, not all devices. So let me clarify what's happening here. The new Evernote for Android is coming, and that means that across the board, Evernote has rebuilt iOS, Windows, and the Mac apps. So we are capable on the desktop versions running side by side your legacy 6.25 version that you've always been running, and then you can run the Evernote 10 version. Again, you have to have premium. If you have basic, you can only run 2 devices at any given time. So that's Evernote Web inclusive. But anyway, now we have Evernote Android finally out in its version. That's rolling out for all Android version 10 devices or later, which means that if you're Android version 9 or earlier, you're not going to see this new Evernote for Android yet. They're working on that, and they're hopefully going to stabilize those installs and then roll it out to everybody as they make their way through. But this, of course, brings the same new intuitive editor to the environment. You're going to have faster search, and of course, more powerful search with the new filters. And now you have a consistent interface across all devices, which is really the part that I'm looking forward to, is just using Evernote on all of my devices and them looking and feeling and acting the same, in the same way that I've always used Evernote. So very happy to see it starting to launch and now having the same consistent interface across all of them as Evernote goes ahead and improves those as well. One final point about this: once you do get the new Evernote for Android, you can't go back. So like with the desktop versions, you can run those 2 apps parallel, but unlike that on the mobile devices, iOS and Android, you will not be able to revert back to the old one. Android, it's a little bit easier to kind of, with baling wire and duct tape to make it go back to the old one, but you're going to break a couple things when you do that. So just be mindful of the fact that, yes, you could do it. Touch base with me if you absolutely need to. But for the most part, you're talking about once you go forward on that new version, you're now in the new Evernote and you're not going back. Anything else about that? No? Good? Wonderful? Moving right along. What's our next article, Augusto?
So our next article is an article from lifehack.org, and it's how not to lose focus while working. And the article was an interesting article. It quotes Dr. Newport, Professor Newport, and talking about his work on his deep work, but goes about really more focus and distractions, and it's really, it was interesting. It was a fun read, because one of the things that they're trying to do is to show what is the importance of that, and how backed by science is, I don't know, but what I like about was at the end of the article, the 6 tips to improve that focus, and do the physical activities, do the digital distractions. And we were talking earlier about the voice in our heads, but be conscious about the voice that you hear on your heads, as well as the internal distractions. What are your working habits? Francis here, it's a big proponent of time blocking. So all those things are there to really help you find what works for you. What is your physical environment? What are the tools that you use to manage all these things, and how can you make them better? So I know, Francis, you have talked, and you do a summit every year. This is going to be our second year, 2021, on time blocking. So did you have a chance to look at the focus on the article and what you find about it?
Unmuting. Yeah, all the points make sense. If I look back at last year or this year's time blocking summit, those are different topics that were all covered. I didn't see any new science that says that you need to do anything new or different. So it's pretty much reiterates what I've read or heard before. And I use a number of the things that they talk about. But I think that the challenge is, as you mentioned before, how do you do it when you're working from home for the first time? It's a change in environment that makes it difficult, because the traditional workplace is more helpful somewhat in terms of being focused. How do you be focused when all of a sudden you have to work from home? There's kids, there's other people in the household, there's animals running around, there's phones ringing, and all these other distractions come in. And I haven't seen any kind of definitive research or anybody even talking about focusing after you've made the transition. The assumption is that you'll just apply the principles in the same way. And I think we all know from experience that that's not true.
Yeah, and I think for some people, it's easier to focus from home without the distractions. That there are more distractions in the workplace. Co-workers sticking their head in the door, and when you're home, you can put the phone on silent. You can you have more control over those distractions, unless you have small children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it varies so much from person to person.
As the principal at heart, or an ex-principal, Dr. Buck, we are going to do a road trip to Alabama and leave you my 2 kids so you train them on how to not get a distraction. For a week or so.
A week.
Bring it on.
Fantastic. All right. Moving along to our next article, Scott H. Young blogs at scotthyoung.com, and he wrote an article about how to become more curious. And I'm uniquely curious about most things that Scott Young writes about, and sometimes I agree, sometimes I disagree. In the recent couple of weeks, he had talked about another article about how to kind of grow and develop by having conversations with people, and he kind of not attacked, but he said that reading was basically a lesser function than having conversations with people who may be more knowledgeable or smarter than you or otherwise. And now he comes up with this article called How to Become More Curious. And he talks about this notion of looking at the world in curious ways, and really a little bit about the science of curiosity, which is the fact that, not to be, kind of circular logic, but the reality is that the more curious you are, the more curious you'll be. And but what he's really talking about is that asking questions is important. And this goes to my point a couple of weeks ago, then maybe last week or the week before that, which is that the more I look at a book and recognize that when I'm reading, I'm in dialogue with the author, the more curious I am about the material and the more I get from it. I'm a naturally curious person, so there's not really a likelihood of low curiosity ever happening in my life. Low curiosity probably happens when people talk to me about things that they think are exciting. But for the most part, things that other people would otherwise think are mundane, I actually want to understand. I want to understand how those things work. And so I don't particularly have that problem with lacking curiosity in many ways. But he talks about really just asking good questions and continuing through that. There's a book about how to learn, and the name How to Make It Stick, I believe, is the name, and it has about 4 authors. And these were, research scientists who came up with this idea of the concept of learning out of order, so that you learn how to consume in a way that keeps things vital and dynamic. And the more you do that, the more likely you are not to lose interest in the material. And I think that really pushes home the point that curiosity is an integral part in learning. And we need to do this with our children that we're learning from a pedagogical approach, but also from an andragogical as well as pedagogical approach. We need to really be pushing this notion that learning isn't just about passively consuming, turning on a video and just having our eyeballs bombarded with info. We need to really be actively involved and learning how to make these things into challenges, into quests, where we are really truly being challenged. And it's only through that challenge that we make those brain pathways that make us actually retain the material that we're learning. Thoughts, gentlemen?
Yeah, I remember reading a whole bunch of time management articles written by academics, and 90% of the time they never actually defined what time management was. So it struck me that whereas they were trying to gain expertise in an area related to time management, they never actually defined the term. They weren't curious enough to go back and ask, well, what does this actually mean? Because there's considerable disagreement about even if time can be managed. And I think I like what he says about being directed in your curiosity. It's almost, to me, it's like being hard-headed and fighting for the truth, believing that there's a truth behind what you're curious about, and then pounding away at it, kind of like always doing a PhD thesis in a way, pounding away at it until you get at the truth. That kind of hard-headed kind of fighting, I find it's rare in academia, it's rare in the general world, it's rare among bloggers, content creators. We kind of get satisfied very early on and then move on to something else, as opposed to really nailing the problem. that kind of curiosity, I think we
We
don't
kind
have.
of skim. We kind of skim the surface and quantity instead of quality. Hitting a number of different subjects instead of going, down. Focus.
And that's why I continually throughout every year decide on what I'm learning, and then I build out my own syllabus, my own syllabi for those topics. And so every year I'm learning in a way that forces me, challenges me to step up to what I'm doing in terms of learning. And that means I can't learn everything, but what I do learn, I learn deeply, right? So if I'm going to learn about cybersecurity one year, I'm going to go very deep into that subject. And once I do, I'm going to do enough to get a few certifications to really feel like I have a command of that. And then the ongoing learning keeps my curiosity high, because the reality is that mastery breeds greater levels of curiosity and greater momentum to staying current, right? Once you've excelled in an area, then you know enough to be able to ask better questions, and those better questions are both the right questions, and the answers are maybe more specific in that sense. And so you're not actually spending a lot of time with all of the baseline stuff. So there's a rate of compound return when it comes to some level of mastery. Art is saying here, productivity, the cliff notes. the antithesis of that. But yes, always good to have Art's wit with us. Okay, any final thoughts regarding curiosity? Otherwise, we're going to turn our sights, it looks like, on Android. Okay, we're going to turn our sights on Android. Android has 5 new features coming to Android in the next few months, if not weeks, or months. Those 5 new Android apps updates are enhanced map navigation, and that means that there's going to now be a Go tab in your Google Maps app on iOS and Android. This is going to give you an option to be able to quickly navigate, say, to home or work, or if you want to, have a label that says school, and that will give you quick up-to-date information so that you can have directions, live traffic, and so on and so forth, and quickly go ahead and execute navigation to get into that. Next is going to be Gboard. Gboard has the what they call the kitchen, and so the kitchen, of course, the emoji kitchen, has many stickers in their keyboard drawer, in the Gboard drawer. I've said this before, but I just can't help but not say this again. Gboard is a fantastic keyboard, and you can install it both on Android and iOS. You can actually install Gboard on iOS, and it gives you multilingual swipe gesture typing. It gives you access to a whole bunch of other categorically wonderful capabilities, but now they're going from 100 unique combinations of sticker mashups to 14,000. So you will start to see those available on Android 6 or later, coming in the next few weeks. Hopefully they bring Gboard over to iOS with the same emoji kitchen soon. Art is noting here that Gboard can be installed on Chromebooks, and absolutely it is installed on all of my Chromebooks, and I love it.
But also, it is important to mention that when you install the Gboard, you get access to Google. So if you want to do dictation, even on an iOS, if you install that, then now you get access to that keyboard. That, again, it turns to be fantastic. You can use, as I was mentioned earlier, as we were talking about the Alexa and stuff, you have all these pieces installed. You can get the best of every world in the moment you need it. So I think it's an amazing thing.
Yes, I always, on all of my iOS devices, I install Gboard, I install the Google app, and that gives me the Google Assistant on my iOS devices. I mean, really, all Apple devices are just a good hardware vessels for me to be able to access my Google products. So different than Augusto, where it's probably the opposite. But I find the iOS and Mac OS hardware great, but it just ends up being a vehicle for it. When I had my old iPhone, I remember transitioning to my first Nexus device. I decided to go over to the Google platform, having been elevated to being one of the Google Small Business Advisors. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to move everything over there. And I moved from the iPhone to the Nexus, and I realized, oh yeah, the iPhone just had all of my Google apps on it. All I had to do was sign in on the Google side, and everything just kind of popped up, and I went on with my day. There was no real loss in that regard. Okay, continuing on in the Android updates, Google is adding potentially more audiobooks in the Play Store. And the way in which they're doing that is that they are providing publishers in the United States and the United Kingdom with a tool, a machine learning tool that is going to be able to read books and, in essence, give those books voice in the Play Store. So you'll be able to go to the Google Play store to books and into the audiobook section, and now be able to listen to books that otherwise didn't have a narrated function. So this narrating tool is going to be pretty sophisticated, with some natural language and so on and so forth built into it. So that'll be coming to publishers in early 2021. And that means that if you have a book and you are available in the Google Play bookstore and do not have a narrated version, an audiobook version, you can potentially get access to this in early 2021, and then turn your written book into an audiobook. Hint, hint to our authors on the panel today. Okay, moving right along. Google is also
capturing right now.
Yeah, there you go, right? I mean, Google's doing it for you. Google is also bringing enhanced voice access navigation. In essence, they're going to be, again, using they're doing a lot of this machine learning technology, and they're being able to get more and more of it shrunk down to be able to fit on device. And so Android 6.0 and later devices will start getting voice access that's already available in Android 11. So in essence, now you can speak to your Android device through the Google Assistant and gain access to items inside of the interface that you otherwise wouldn't be able to access, buttons and labels that the system doesn't have natural tags associated with, but now you can do it because the system's able to access them better. So that's coming as well. Last two items, Google is bringing nearby share functionality for the direct sharing of Play Store apps with other Android users who are in your vicinity. So this is just extending nearby share that already exists to now being able to take two phones or two Android devices, that is, and being able to come within a vicinity of each other and share an app. That app being in the Play Store, so they can just very quickly and seamlessly move an app from your phone and make a copy over to the other person's phone. So, things like, oh gosh, I have to pay for the what do you call that? You're in a parking meters. Many times, you're out somewhere and you have to pay the parking meter, and you're a low bandwidth area, low Wi-Fi, low mobile connectivity, and you want to download that silly application. Now you're able to go ahead and say, oh, hey, if you have the application, we come nearby, I can now share that application from one phone to the other over Bluetooth LE, WebRTC, whatever it is, peer-to-peer Wi-Fi, and it just quickly transfers over to the other device, and now you have the application, and you can go ahead and go on with your day. So very, very good to do that. Just going back to the prior story, Art is noting that he replaces his Samsung keyboard with Gboard because of the better dictation, and yeah, I find it to be just a much more fluid app generally in terms of the Gboard over all of the other keyboards built into the devices. And then last but not least is Google is expanding Android Auto to 36 more countries. I'm not going to list all the countries, but just know that it's going out to 36 more countries of the many other countries that it currently supports. And so that means you'll be able to have Google apps and services in the dashboard of those compatible cars. So that's really good to hear. Of course, they need to be running Android 10 or above. So those are for those cars, and then Android 9 users need to download the application, and then it will use Android Auto in the app itself. Alrighty. Any commentary on that? Otherwise, we're going to move along in our stories. We have a couple more stories before our first break. Next story is about bilingual speakers and how they deal with pain in their preferred, or what they feel is their more culturally, dominant language. And so, Augusto, what did you think about this article as our resident multilingual person here?
It is absolutely true, and it's really interesting. because I didn't know that your main language could change. So my language was English and Spanish, sorry, and I learned English. Okay, my kids, especially my oldest, her first language was Spanish. Okay, she spent those 4 years with me. I work at home, so she spent more listening Spanish than English, and as a little kid, before going full time to school, Spanish was her first language, no question about it. When she began going to school, that switched, and she's bilingual, but her main language now is in English, and you could see how that pain changed from being in Spanish to being in English. That is really interesting, but it's true. If I hit my toe with a corner, or my little finger with a corner, there is no word in English at that time that my brain can process.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that whatever is going to be the more dominantly mapped language is going to be where your thoughts are going to naturally go, right? And that makes a lot of sense.
It happened, as I was saying, as you get tired, you tend to go to that language. So if you talk to me and I'm really tired for whatever reason, my English is worse, and I tend to do more Spanish. And it has happened to maybe everybody in the panel today, that I go and throw sentences in Spanish and they look at me like, English, please. Okay, but it's just that. It's you get tired, and your brain goes to that main language, and it happened to most of the people I know who speak more than one language.
Yeah, and what's fascinating to me is my brother was telling me recently about a study that I don't know if it was a study, but he had come across something, and this was maybe a year or so ago, and he had said, Russian has 4 words for the color blue, and people in Russian see the color blue and think and emote differently based on that. It's a different experience of the world, and I feel a little bit marred. I feel cheated. Yes, that I didn't have 4 colors blue growing up.
That's a dream of a designer.
Right, exactly. But language has a way of impressing upon you your experience of the world, emotionally and otherwise. And that's a really good note for us all when we're trying to be productive, that we are emoting potentially in our native languages, and thinking outside of that can also be useful. Like, for example, those of us who maybe have high anxiety or have issues with emotional regulation, it may be actually really good to learn. This is not scientific. I'm just thinking out loud here. Like, maybe learning another language could be really good for people to mediate language. If you think in that language when you are feeling anxious, then you have maybe a little bit more control, because it's slower between your brain and basically the outer portions of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, and your amygdala. So, like, since you have to do more processing, it slows things down, and maybe you have a little bit more regulatory control. So I just feel like there's a lot of
that you're saying is accurate. I particularly journal in English, and the reason is I slow down. I force to slow down the speed.
Yeah.
If I journal in Spanish, I can't. There's no way for me to write down or type.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
I did a training in which the person, the learner or the individual would actually use a list of emotions. If you've ever seen these lists, they have like maybe 100 different words for different emotions. And when you start using it, you realize that you might say that I'm sad at a certain kind of high level, but as you go down to be more specific around the kind of sadness you're feeling, I noticed, and all the people who have done this say similar things, there's a shift when you go from a high level description to a more detailed, more accurate description. And it's almost like you're learning a wider vocabulary for your emotions. And if I take that all the way to the other end, the people who have experienced as being more sort of violent and short-tempered, my anecdotal evidence is that they don't really have much language. So they use basic words like I hate you, you disrespected me, I'm going to kill you. So it's very sort of basic language that they're using. They don't have access to the full range of emotional language in English. And from my time in therapy, I noticed that that's kind of what happened with me. I was learning to identify yes, but then also to find words for feelings that were more fine than the gross feelings. I think that's powerful. That's only in English.
And then also the profanity comes in, with that limited language, that it suddenly becomes peppered with those few words where the purpose is to elicit emotion from the other person.
Right.
It's so unfair. It's so unfair.
No, but there's a reason for expletives. And there's actually a rich psychological and sociological reason for expletives, and so not to get too far into the weeds here, but I think it's really important for people to recognize that expletives are actually really important for cohesion within groups. There's a lot of reasons for it being there, but at the same time, what you're both talking about is actually sounds very sound psychologically, which is that the more words you know how to describe things, the greater your brain has to map where you are feeling on that now spectrum of things, right? There are roughly about 10 different positive emotions, for example, that research scientists really categorize. There are fewer in the negative side, maybe by 1 or 2. And when you think about the 20 range emotion, right, from positive to negative affect, if you teach people those things, then they are far more capable of now identifying what's causing the underlying issue than people who are just saying, I'm happy and I'm sad, when in reality those mean nothing. And I've all but tried to throw them into the rubbish pile of my own lexicon because it's useless. And I wrote an article some time ago about the psychology of fulfillment, and how I really have a strong kind of not hatred, but really disgust for that term happiness or happiness psychology, because what it really does say is that we don't know how to term how we feel positively. So let's just use this umbrella term like happy. And as soon as you say, well, I'm feeling contented, or I'm feeling a moment of joy right now, I'm elated, those words have much more specific meaning and actually unearth for you something really positive. And I think once we start to use positive language, especially with self-speak, because a lot of what we do in personal productivity spaces, we have a lot of negative self-speak. And I hear a lot of people in my personal life, and certainly clients, as I'm talking to them, I have a rule: if I'm meeting with you, you can't talk badly about yourself. And I will keep poking at you when you do that. And it starts to people to recognize, oh yeah, you know what? I'm feeling this emotion, right? This negative affect, but that doesn't necessarily mean I am that thing, right? So certainly, like people who say, "Oh, I'm a procrastinator," or those don't label yourself. Those are really, really bad, and which is why I'm actually, while I really like the Atomic Habit and James Clear and his work, I'm very much against the notion of taking on personas like, I'm a runner and that's why I'm going to develop a habit. Because what that really does is it creates this sense of tribalism, and it makes you feel like an outgrouper when you fail. And this can be very detrimental to greater psychological safety and greater risk taking, which is what humans need to do. You need to be curious. You need to take risk. So we have to remember there's a double-edged sword to all of the kind of positive language that is around habit development, when in reality, habit development, I think, is actually rather useless in the sense of we spend a lot of time focused on habit and not enough time focused on routine. And that means a lot of people fail and they don't step back up to the plate to do more in that category. So I can spend hours talking about this, but we have the rest of the show to go. So we have one more item here in the stories for the first part of the week, and that is how to take a nap on the A Life of Productivity blog that Chris Bailey writes. And he talks about how to take a coffee nap. And since, Francis, you are the resident expert on the coffee nap, thoughts? You're muted. You are still muted.
Could you not read my lips?
I could, but not. But the
we could, but not the podcast listeners.
Okay, so the coffee nap is simple. You drink a cup of coffee before you take a 20-minute nap, and even if you can't take the nap, you take a fake nap. And the fake nap works just as well as, or better, than the real nap. So you essentially put your body into a state of semi-napness. And I found that it works maybe half the time, but when it works, it really gives you a big kick. And there's all brain chemistry involved and all these reasons why, but something does click, and the energy that I feel after a coffee nap is substantially different than at any other point. And when I take the nap, and it doesn't quite work that way, and I can't tell why. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's still a bit of a mystery to me.
You know, it is interesting because I have tried that, and I have tried that successfully, and take the coffee before to take a little nap. But as you said, it's not every time. I have not discovered what is the secret to do it, but when it works, it is really, really good.
There's some secret sauce to it that nobody seems to have grokked just yet.
Yeah, there are certain reasons for that. That's probably very unique to individuals, and the reality is that it really has to do with the amount of adenosine in your system. Adenosine is the chemical in your body system that once it reaches a certain level, you feel wakefulness or sleepiness, and the reduction in that adenosine is what, of course, causes you to reawaken, to feel that wakefulness again. So just as the takeaway, which I think is really useful here, Bailey says that to take a coffee nap, kind of summarizing what you said, Francis, drink a cup of coffee, then immediately nap for 20 to 25 minutes, depending upon how quickly you fall asleep, if you're capable of it, and then you'll wake with a boost from both the nap and the coffee. The effects of the caffeine are stronger after a coffee nap, and it takes roughly about that time for your body to, kind of absorb the oils from the coffee, from the caffeine in coffee. So good to note. And that also
it feels good.
It does.
You feel like Superman for
one of the things that I have noticed is that earlier in the year I was using a straw to drink my coffee because I was recording on podcasts, and so therefore, since I didn't want to make noise, and putting the cup to my face with a headset on and that kind of thing, I was drinking out of a straw. Well, the oils tend to reside on the surface of your coffee cup if you're not stirring regularly, and so the oils would stay up there, and so I would drink down and not actually get any benefit from the coffee. So just note that the caffeine is in the oil, so remember that you have to drink the part that has the oil in order to get the benefits of the caffeine boost.
As Art quoting here, and we are going to be quoting apparently Francis from now on, we are not going to be sleeping at work. We are going to be on a state of semi-napness from now on. So if you need that excuse, you quote Francis Wade, a productivity expert. Are you sleeping in the job? No, I'm not sleeping in the job. I'm in a semi-napless state.
All right. And so with that, we have reached the first half of our stories for this week. And so now a word from our sponsor this week, W3C Web Services.
Did you know half of small businesses don't have websites and half don't make it past 1 year in business? Are these stats correlated? We're not sure, but we think you should have a website. W3C Web Services provides affordable managed WordPress website hosting, along with VPS, domain name registration, and other small business-focused services. For listeners of this podcast, you can book a free 30-minute digital marketing strategy session when you purchase a new hosting plan, $150 value. Once you purchase your new hosting plan, forward the receipt to support@w3cinc.com with the podcast title in the subject line of the email message, and we'll get you scheduled for your digital marketing strategy session. Head over to anythingbutidle.com/webhosting and get started with your small business website today. And now, back to your show.
Welcome back, everybody, to Anything But Idle. Before the break, we're doing our first half of our stories of the week, and now we are going to close out our stories of the week with our second half. And so let's get into it. Let's talk about our next story of the week. And this one's about a little bit of negative news about Google illegally spying on workers and the NLRB. What's going on there, Augusto?
Well, they are claiming that didn't happen, but honestly, Google was caught spying on their employees, and those are not the news that anybody wants to read, but happens. And it may be illegal and it may not be great, but they have been caught spying on workers before they fire them, at least according to the U.S. Labor Board. And it's a story that is in process. But if that is actually get caught, it's a big violation of the U.S. labor laws.
Right. So in essence, the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, put down a ruling that basically said that Google should not have spied on some employees. Basically, spying is the wrong term here. They recognized that employees were looking at other people's calendars in order to be able to start the process of having discussions about establishing a union. And unionizing is protected by law in the United States. And so Google was, in essence, told that they shouldn't do that. They are going to appeal that ruling and probably go before an ALJ and figure that part out, or an administrative panel of some sort in front of the NLRB. So this is still not yet determined. It's a first step win for the plaintiffs in this case before the NLRB. And so I don't know what the right choice is here. I think from Google, they're basically saying we protect our employees' privacy, and to have people having access with highly sensitive credentials to our employees' data is a breach of trust and privacy and security. On the employee side, they're saying, yeah, but the reason we were trying to do this was for this this other purpose that seems to be a higher moral ground. And so I honestly don't know the answer there. And hopefully the NLRB can come out with an appropriate response here, and we can figure out what really happened and why it happened. And hopefully Google adapts. I think they're a good corporate culture, even with all of the things that have been noted of late. They've had walkouts and other kinds of things, and they had the whole issue with Andy Rubin and his, the I don't know what type of scandal it was, but some kind of sexual assault scandal or something akin to that. But either way, not really worth worrying about in the grand scheme of things. Okay, next up, Chrome 87.
Chrome 87, and
this is
that
OS 87. Chrome OS 87. Forgive me, Chrome OS 87. And
Chrome OS 87 is out, and one of the cool things that they're bringing is tab search and Bluetooth battery level, and among other things. But I think those two are a big deal. So, at least for the people who again live on Chrome OS 87. So, they are going to give you new wallpapers there. So, you were talking early in the show about that intentional learning, may have not been the word you used, but on how you create your learning thing. One of the things for me this year was to really learn to use Chrome. And one of the things that this show has brought to me, same as Productivity Cast, the productivity podcast that we do, is I am Apple centric. I work on an iPad. I have iPads, iPhone, Macs, and having other people in other platforms, in the Chrome platform specifically, has allowed me to understand better. So one of the things I did was I got an old machine, turned it into a Chromebook with the idea of learning what the Chromebook OS can or cannot do. And I'm going to say, I have been impressed now for a while. Even it was going to be a 3-month project. And the thing is, what I use now to record the shows, because I like the form factor of the old Surface. So it works really, really well for that. But the more I've seen what Chrome OS has been doing, the more interesting it is and the more part-to-part is. So I'm pretty excited of this kind of things.
Yeah, so folks can have a strong understanding here. So Chrome OS is what runs on your Chromebooks. And so in the 87th version of that, different than Chrome, the browser, Chrome version 87, which has other new features associated with it. But Chrome OS 87, now you will be able to click the little top right-hand button in your browser. Again, this is an 87 of OS, not Chrome, the browser, but you'll be able to click that little button and you'll be able to search your tabs so you can just quickly jump to them. Now in Chrome 87, the browser, Google Chrome 87, you are now able to search for and through your tabs. So if you have, like I do sometimes, 100 tabs open in your Chrome browser, you can now type into the Omnibox, that upper level address URL bar, and type in. And if you have an open tab, a tab that's in one of those, it will actually open it up and it'll give you a new chip that you can click on that says switch to tab. So you can quickly jump to those things, because at some point, the tabs get really, really small. And so you aren't able to actually click on any of them with high dexterity or without high dexterity. And so for me, it's really great because now I can just go to the Omnibox, type in the name of the tab that I want to go to. And I can also learn, do I have one of those tabs open? Especially if I'm doing really high level research, I want to be able to do that. Chrome OS 87 is also bringing the capability for you to see the Bluetooth power level of your devices that are connected. This is obviously a really nice addition to the system. Now, snapping back to Chrome 87, the browser, this is really awesome. And
okay, so I don't know exactly what happened on the awesomeness, yes, but I'm sure he will be back and get into that news. He's back.
sorry, I closed the wrong tab.
That's what happened when your tabs are really, really small.
Exactly.
That's
If
right.
Chrome only
Dexterity.
Yes, exactly. More dexterity. So my going back to my point, which is that Chrome 87, the browser version, now gives you the capability of going in and executing different actions. They're calling them Chrome actions. So you can now go in, if you're in the latest version of Chrome now, so go to about Chrome, click on that button, update to the latest 87.x. You can now type in delete cache, for example, CACHE, which is your temporary file storage. You can now delete browser history and things of that nature just from typing certain phrases into the system. So you have a greater deal of natural language capabilities over the system than having to poke around in the settings now. You can actually type some of these things into it. More Chrome actions will come over time, but the one that works at least most consistently for me is delete browsing history or delete cache in your Omnibox, and that will again open up a chip. You can click on that chip, and then it will execute that function, that file. They're going to bring some of the finance pieces with Google Pay, so you can bring up your wallet, change passwords, those kinds of things, all from the Omnibox. So we're going to see more and more of these features come into the Omnibox so that you don't have to go poking around in your settings. You can now find them directly from just basically searching for them in the interface. Next up, Augusto, what's our next story this week? You are muted.
Well, that's because it's a mystery story, and it's about Samsung. Is not going to release their famous Galaxy Note in 2021. So the Galaxy brand, as we know, at least for 2021, it's not going to be here. Samsung is reporting that they're going to let the brand rest or go.
Yeah, and the reality is it makes a lot of sense. They have so many phones. I mean, Samsung has like a bazillion different models. So a little bit of concentration here makes a lot of sense. They're going to take the S Pen and they're just going to put it into their Galaxy line of phones, which makes sense. Now the phones are big enough that they can fit them probably. So they could just basically put the S Pens in the existing Galaxy phones, and we shouldn't see any major hiccup there.
Well, and I think the phones has the Galaxy, when the Note came, it was at least on what the standard phone size, a much larger phone. But as you said, the phones have been growing and growing and growing, so it makes sense to go to that.
Yes, and Art notes the S Pen remains, and so he's confirming my note here that we'll still see the stylus form in the stylus accessory in all of the Samsung Galaxy line going forward. So it'll be at least capable, even if it's not capable of being shoved into the phone itself. But we'll still see it there. Okay.
So the next article is a video in 9to5 Mac showing how Windows virtualization on the Apple M1 give nearly 2 times the faster performance than a Surface Pro X. And I needed to put it in there because, hey, if you need to live in Windows, at least get a chipset that is going to fly with that thing.
I still do not see the reason for putting Windows on a Mac. I know that lots of people do it, but I respect everyone's choices.
Well, I did it I did it in a time where I work in a corporation where you were required to live on a Windows because of the software and the stuff. And before virtualization in Parallels was really, really good, I installed Windows in the Mac with Boot Camp, so that way I could run both because it was impossible otherwise.
Yeah, and see, in my world, I wouldn't have allowed that if I were CTO. Anyway, I would have blocked your capability of cross installing on a different chip, so it wouldn't have made any difference. But the fact of the matter is that it's great to see people being able to put the operating system of choice on their hardware of choice. I totally understand that. I'm joking, but I think that what I'm really curious about seeing is whether these M1 chips, once they bring out the next line next year, I'm gonna probably get a Mac Mini to play, but the next line of Apple hardware that comes out with Apple Silicon, I think is going to be much more exciting to me than this existing one. And the ability to go from 2x faster performance on, than the Surface Pro X, if I can get, factors double that, then that's worth me moving over and putting Windows on that sucker. So, because then I'll be excited about it. So, all right, moving right along. What's our next story, Augusto?
Well, Microsoft create this productivity score and is scaling back on what is being called the privacy invading productivity score. And basically they create this, and the idea was to allow employers to check how productive their workers were. And people didn't like it. And not that I can blame them for that. As I'm not unhappy of not having a Microsoft application in my life. So, and part of that is I didn't enjoy Outlook. I didn't enjoy many of the things that came with living on a Microsoft environment. The question that the article have is this too late? And now people will have the doubt, and the controversy surrounding this will not make it, really good. And really, who knows?
Yeah. So to explain for everybody, so Microsoft put out this new tool. It's called the Productivity Score. It's still out there. They've just made some modifications, but in essence, before they made the modifications, what would happen is it would take some statistics from how long you were in Outlook, how long you were messaging people in Teams, if you didn't turn on your webcam during video calls in Teams, and it would put this all into a score that would be provided to your employer. And your employer could see you individually in the system. And that, of course, raised a whole bunch of hairs on the back of the necks of everybody who knew this was happening. In essence, in response to that, Microsoft has changed Microsoft 365, the platform itself, so that now the productivity score removes identifying information from individual people. I think they're doing the right thing here, which is removing this kind of both privacy invasion, but also potential huge exposure to litigation. Think about the companies that are gaining all of this access about their employees at their homes, and just a nightmare situation. Why they thought this was smart. But anyway, the point is that now Microsoft is redefining how the user interface works with the productivity score, and they're measuring on a holistic level, on the business level, which means that individual employers, say a manager who has, a romantic inclination toward an employee, can't start, analyzing that data and using it inappropriately against employees. Like, that's the level of stupid that Microsoft created here with this tool. And so they scaled that back. In essence, now the service will continue to produce a score between 0 and 800, similar to like a credit score, your FICO score, right? 0 to 800, and it adds up these scores in 8 different categories. I'm presuming you can get up to 100 in each of the categories. The categories are, and I think this is important for us in our own productive lives to be thinking about how Microsoft sees productivity. They see this in the categories of communication, meetings, content collaboration, teamwork, mobility, endpoint analytics, which means where things are touching at the edges of your network connectivity, and then the 365 app health, each with a total of 100 possible points. So confirming my thoughts here, which is that each category goes up to 100. So in essence, Microsoft has scaled back now. A company can see this more on that holistic level. But of course, at the same time, Microsoft filed a patent for an employee scoring system. So these specific metrics, are now in the patent process, at least in the United States, and so we'll see how this bears out. But I think Microsoft has made the right choice here in backing off of this and scaling back. Art Gelix is noting that he's reserving the app name for Productivity Karma to boost your score, so yeah.
Well, and our next news comes about talking about that karma. No, I'm joking. But it's about how to better manage what the article, The Art of Mindfulness, called your life admin. And I remember when I read the first time I read Getting Things Done by David Allen, and he talked, I don't remember if it was on the book or it was on the Getting Things Done Fast, and mostly because I got those two things pretty close time-wise, and I listened to both and read both many times. But I remember him telling the story of people who were having seven-figure salaries but having their light cut off. And at that time, I was beginning my professional career. I just had finished my master. I was moving to Los Angeles, and I could not understand the concept of that happening, mostly because that was a luxury for us. But as I have grown as in the productivity world and as a coach, and I have helped people with their productivity system, one of the things that is really interesting to me is how people don't have this concept of life admin for their own life, and how they have this separation, but really in the same way they manage their professional life, they have ignored completely that administration of their personal, or many of the things of their personal life. So it was a really good article, because I agree, in the same way you manage productivity for one side of your life, you need to do it for the whole. You are not different components. When I teach the connect invisible dots thing, the protocol, the first pillar is the pillar of totality. Why? Because you are one. You don't need to make distinctions between word and play and anything else. You can really have it all, but you need to learn to manage all. So, they make a list: paying your bills, parking tickets, your taxes, personal email, shopping and returning stuff, planning parties, and many other things. But so there is 4 productivity people in here. What is your experience into how your clients, the people you deal with, is really dealing with this concept of their life admin?
Yeah, I had found that article somewhere, skimmed it a little bit, and was just pulling it up and rereading it. We've got all the deep work concept of get rid of the little things, focus on that big, huge thing that's going to change the world, or that one thing that's going to make everything excellent. But then you get to the, who's going to pick up the dry cleaning? Who's going to empty the dishwasher? Who's going to see that the dog has his heartworm pill? That sort of thing. So the whole idea of just identifying those things, big and little, and putting them in a system that has some kind of order to it, so that you batch related activities, so that things get done quickly. It makes negotiating life easier, so that you're doing preventive maintenance rather than handling things when they get broken, and when those little things have now become big things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see all of life as a system of systems. And so your productivity system has many subsystems. And if you really want to manage effectively in life, you need to have control over the systems in your life. And so all of this life admin stuff sounds to me like the concept of deciding what is going to be a part of the system and what's not going to be a part of the system. And everybody has varying states of wanting to have control over these pieces. And I happen to want to have more control than others. But that also means that when I have that level of control, I am creating a level of reduced anxiety for myself so that I can spend that energy that otherwise would be spent concerned about making sure that, everybody gets to where they need to get to on time, and that the work gets done on time and on budget, right? All of those things get reduced down to the optimal level, so that I can then use creative faculties in the upper levels and use more of it throughout the course of my day. And so I know when my systems are working, when I have that time and energy. And like this year, where the rails went off because of all of the work and everything else like that, you depend upon those systems to be able to say, oh, you know what, I can double down on these systems, so that, or the subsystems that really allow the life admin to continue to keep going on while we are in this changing flux, and so on and so forth. It provides some really unique and interesting comments here. So I just want to read a few of them. If you want to, you can obviously check out the articles in the show notes. But they talk about performing a weekly brain dump. I'm a little concerned about that idea. For some folks who have high levels of output, that can be very difficult to keep up with. If you just keep emptying your brain of stuff, you might be more generative than others, and you're not going to really be able to catch up on that. So I don't particularly tell people, oh, just empty your mind of everything, all the time. There's a time and place for a mind sweep, but big treasure troves of piles of inputs or outputs into an input tool like an inbox sometimes actually creates more trouble than it's worth. So I don't particularly recommend to people who just, doing weekly brain dumps and having that pile up week after week after week, especially since many times those things will be new. They'll be the same things, right? You just keep tracking the same things over and over and over again. And that's really not useful to you. Just, deal with what's in front of you in those initial states. It talks about holding regular meetings with family, and that being your spouse and or with the children, and potentially with other relatives if need be. I don't know if weekly is necessary, but talks about having regular meetings, scheduling regular maintenance, and kind of dealing with some of these more gnarly issues like procrastination and using some automation and so on and so forth in life. So it gives some good examples. It's well worth the read.
Yeah. Of course, with the idea of a brain dump once a week, I'm thinking a brain dump would happen more when you institute a productivity system. When you go from everything's in my to everything's in the system, that's when you've got the brain dump. From there, it's sort of an ongoing thing. As something hits your brain, you either handle it or you dump it into the system. Then I couldn't imagine waiting and, oh gosh, what has piled up in my brain over the last week? No, nothing has. It's all gone straight into the system.
Well, unfortunately, I think life is imperfect, and I see a lot of people who fall off the wagon and therefore need to come back onto the wagon and reestablish those things. And so I think that's what it's mostly about, is the fact that if you have a stretch of a month and a half since you've done a weekly review, some kind of retrospective, you need to sit down and do that again, right? That makes a lot of sense. What I'm, and I hear what you're saying, Frank, and it's what I do, which is I'm regularly capturing, so therefore it doesn't pile up. My big concern is that many times what I see when I sit down with people is that they are piling on the pile, and so they create a bigger mountain out of the molehill, because it really truly becomes a mountain because they just keep taking smaller molehills and jamming them with more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. And so I really over time have kind of shied away from saying, okay, let's just get it all out of your head. It's more, let's build up the skills for learning how to clarify, that is, process and organize, and then actually do the things on the list so that you feel that sense of efficacy, of self-efficacy, and then you can start getting more out of your head and more into the system so that you feel greater sense of control and perspective.
Yeah, I find articles like this one, they skip a level, because he goes right into the details of essentially what he does, or the specific actions. Here's the software I use. Here's the brain dump I do every week. And I think while the actions are based on sound principles and they work for him, you're lost if you have to use the principles he uses because he skipped over that part and gone into the application, as opposed to staying at the level of principles. It's like teaching someone the specifics of doing something without teaching them exactly why and how. So that when the time comes to I need to make a change, you can't make the change because you never really understood the principle.
And I think part of this is that it's a hodgepodge of suggestions. That's always a risk you run when you are trying to give advice in blog format. It's a mechanism for starting a conversation. Remember, blog posts are about starting conversations; they're not about ending them. And so, if he's doing the right job, he's started us in a conversation about it, and we're talking about it, right? So he's done his job, or she has done her job, and that's the main point about it. I think, for those of us who are interested in the material, then we can sit down and say, okay, what are our life admin systems, right? What are the subsystems we need to have an optimal life for us, right? Maybe you don't care about the messy dining room table. It drives me nuts, right? Like, I can't have that. So I need to make sure those things are taken care of. That requires a subsystem in my world, right? So when the mail comes in, and that's the natural place for the mail to come into the house now in this layout, things go onto the dining room table. We need to deal with them every day. I cannot not deal with that. And so these are the kinds of principles that are really ultimately part of the routine, right? We need to figure out what is our daily routine. Where do things pile up, both internally and externally? And then start to figure out, how do we move through that? How do we get beyond that first level challenge and really become productive in those spaces? As we move around in our places and spaces, how do we make them more productive for us? And we can do that. We just have to bring that to our awareness, and we frequently don't. That's all. Okay. Do we have a final story of the week?
We have a final story. How to fix your audio level problems in Windows 10. So in the past week or so, YouTube videos has been watching and sound a little faint. So there is an article on how to fix it if you are finding this problem in your Windows 10. It comes from Lifehacker. It's a 5-minute fix, or that's a column. But if you are having that issues, go and look to the volume mixer, and you are going to find the solution to it. Fix it and be on your way.
Yeah. So anytime you see that little volume icon in your taskbar in Windows 10, you could just right-click on it and you'll see both the sound settings and your volume mixer, and you could do all kinds of things in there. And frequently, whenever I'm having a problem with audio changing, it's because Windows 10 is attempting to do that equalization, that sound balancing, when I don't want it to. So I try to turn off all those, anything that says automatic in the system, I turn it off, because again, I'm a little bit of a control freak. We already know that's established. So I like to have control over those pieces, and I don't want things to be changing around, especially since I have a mixer and an interface sitting on my desk. So I am in direct control of my audio settings. I don't want Microsoft Windows messing with that. So just know that you have that capability of turning those features off, and that gives you a little bit more control. So good on that. That brings us to the end of our headlines this week, and we're going to go now into our new tools of the week. And so Augusto and I come across many personal productivity tools and services each week. And in this segment, New Tools of the Week, we each bring you a tool we think you might like, and we invite our panelists always to share as well, and so they will today. And so let's get into it. Let's talk about our tools this week. Our first tool this week is actually a pair of them. I'm actually going to talk about 2 tools this week. I'm going to try and bring this up on screen, and bear with me while I go ahead and do that. But my first tool this week is a tool called clippings.io. And clippings.io is a tool for you to be able to take your Kindle highlights, going back to that Kindle story, you can take your Kindle highlights and, in essence, pull those highlights and notes into another tool. So for me, I want to grab those Kindle highlights and notes and bring them into Evernote. And so I can go ahead and connect clippings.io to the Evernote account of choice, and it'll just pull those notes into the system. So I can read books, take notes, annotate, and go. And that's just been so helpful for being able to do that. So very, very happy to be using clippings.io. Now, this is another tool that I recently came across, and this one's called Readwise. Readwise is akin to Clippings, and it has its own app, though. So different than Clippings, you're consuming some of that content inside of the Readwise application. You can both take notes, and it also then synchronizes with a few more applications than just, say, Evernote and a few other. I forget what the other application Clippings connects to. I just use it with Evernote, but I know it connects to maybe another application or so. But this one connects to highlights that you can make from the Kindle, Instapaper, Pocket, and iBooks. So it gives a greater kind of surface to pull from. And so I've just started playing with Readwise. I will probably use Clippings and Readwise now. Clippings for my primary Kindle reading, and then Readwise for the other applications when I read it in different places. But in essence, I want to ultimately centralize all of my data into Evernote so that I can go back and refer back to these things. So anything that allows me to do that, especially in an automated way, I'm just really excited about. And so I'm glad that I have found Readwise, and I'm looking forward to playing around with it more and grabbing that data out of the system and into my note-taking app of choice. Right now, it's saying that it works with Evernote, Notion, and Roam. So they're really trying to be a little bit, more progressive, not connecting to maybe some of the older tools like OneNote and otherwise. But currently, they're connecting to Evernote, Notion, and Roam. All right, those are my 2 new tools of the week for you. Augusto, what is your new tool this week? I think you are muted.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. The muting button is not working. FE File Explorer for the iPad is also available for Android and the Mac. But really, I discovered this app on the iPad. And if we go back to iOS 12 or less, managing your files, organize your files was painful. And for some people, it's still painful. This little app can allow you to access files on computers, servers, drives, anything. The cloud do file transfers that for the people who use devices, it's painful sometimes. Okay, I want to move this file from my phone or from Google Drive to somewhere else, and it's difficult and it's painful. So this application make it a piece of cake to go from anything to anything. It also has discovery files. You can edit some basic documents. You can play videos on it, view photos. So it is a really, really powerful application. They have a free version or a pro version. Honestly, I begin with a free version and pay it up because I wanted to. It was so good that I didn't want it to disappear. But if you struggle with files on your devices, your tablet, your Chromes, your iPhones, this is a priceless application to use.
Fantastic. All right. Next up, Frank, do you have a tool for us this week that you wanted to share?
Yes. Woven calendar. That's
nice.
kind of been on my list to kind of explore for a while, and I really like it. For anybody who's got a Google Calendar or Outlook calendar, it pulls it right in. It just syncs back and forth. Who maybe has they have to use Outlook at work, but they use a Google Calendar, pull in both of them into Woven and sync them up. It comes in handy is where you're trying to schedule meetings with somebody else, and maybe you're using Calendly. It does the same thing Calendly does, only it's built right into Woven. If you're trying to have a meeting where 6 people are going to be in that same meeting, and you're trying to find a time where everybody can meet, like we've always used Doodle. Well, Woven will handle that as well. And then plus it gives you some neat little statistics down the sideboard. When you log in the morning and you open your calendar in the morning, it tells you what that first event is, how long it is to it, and even gives you a little button where you could quickly email the other people who are in that meeting. It lets you know, for instance, Ray, if there were, you and I collaborate on a number of different things, quickly know where are all the different meetings coming up that you and I are going to be in together. Well, your name's listed down there, and so I can click. There's every meeting in which we're both participants. It also gives you the meetings that you have scheduled recently. So let's say I'm adding things to the calendar during the day, and at the end of the day, I want to review with somebody, here are the things that were added to my calendar. Instead of having to remember what those are or sort of thumb through my calendar, it gives you a little list of these are the things that were recently added to your calendar. So it's just a very, very neat, very practical thing. And right now it's free. I know I haven't paid them anything. So I can see there it does have pricing. And, when I've clicked on that, it looks like there is a free plan and a paid plan. Be that when I got it, it was still in beta, and maybe I'm grandfathered in and am getting a little more than I should be getting. But it's something to definitely, I think, check out. They do have a YouTube channel with a couple of really good tutorials on getting started with it. So I'm liking it. And it's nothing that if at some point I became disenchanted, my Google Calendar is still there and it's 100% up to date. Whatever's added to Woven goes on my Google Calendar and vice versa. So it's very seamless.
Fantastic. Thank you, Frank. Francis, your tool this week?
This week?
Yeah.
In video.
Go for it. I'm going to bring it up on screen. Start talking about it.
Oh, start talking. Okay, so in video is a piece of magic. That's all I can say. I went from being a novice, ignorant, useless, not really understanding how to put together short 30-second, 2-minute ads to putting out one last week. It took me about a half an hour from concept to completion. And it looked, for the amount of time I put in, it looked fabulous. And I had previously relied on a design company, a graphic design company to do this for me. It would take about a week to do the same 20 seconds. And all of a sudden, I'm putting them out at similar quality for half an hour. So they have these built-in templates that essentially you go in, you change the language, you change the pictures. It keeps all of the movement, the animations, keeps the transitions. You're just changing. You could just change words and pictures or words and videos and put in your own logo. And in no time, you have a video that looks amazing for the amount of time that you've put in. I'm on the business plan, I think they call it, which is, they recently had a sale, and I believe I'm paying about $10 a month or something like that. But the value is ridiculous. The value I'm getting from the time I've spent learning the app and the amount I've spent, amount I've paid is just out of this world. It's not the one you want to go in and edit a half an hour. I don't even think you can edit these long videos that you would need a shortcut for, or a heavy duty video processing type of program. It's not that, but it's bells and whistles squeezed into just a few minutes when you want it to really look snazzy and sort of catch the attention. An eye-stopping video, once again, the return on investment is out of this. This is the best return I've gotten on investment in years in terms of time and money. Just really
Fantastic.
amazing. How do they do that? It's really
Probably by using AWS or some other cloud server to be able to reduce cost and bring you something of value. So good on that.
literal answer.
You know me, literal as always. Okay, with that, thank you, gentlemen. We are going to move on to our story of the week. This week, as I told you at the top of our show, we are going to be talking about the fact that Salesforce had been rumored to be in discussions to buy Slack, the chat tool, and it's just been confirmed. Salesforce, the CRM company, is now going to be buying Slack for $27.7 billion, according to folks, who know about it. So in essence, Salesforce made $20 billion in annual revenue just this past year, I believe. And they were going to be paying, 1.5x, almost 1.4, I guess, 1.3, 1.4x of that annual revenue for the purchase of Slack. And this is going to obviously have profound effects on the productivity market and the productivity world, with Salesforce becoming a part of Slack. And I'm really curious from you all, how do you think this is going to change the nature of how people use Slack? Because it has become somewhat of a Silicon Valley de facto tool. A lot of those folks are using, in the tech space, Slack, and this will naturally and presumably become more tightly ingrained in Salesforce. Many companies use Salesforce and Slack, and now they'll be able to integrate those things more tightly together. How do you see this changing the way in which people work?
So it is going to be interesting if you look at from the sales perspective. Hopefully, it's going to provide a really tight integration, or it's going to eventually provide a tight integration with Salesforce. That communication with things probably is going to allow you to send contacts, to send information, help me with this, approve this. So from that perspective of speed up issues inside of a sales organization with Salesforce, I think for Salesforce is an incredible thing to do. From the Slack spirit of communication among the company, it's going to work really well if you live on Salesforce. The question is going to be, what is going to happen if you use Slack but live on something else? Because it's suspect that the integration is going to be tightly done with Salesforce, and Salesforce integrate with an incredible amount of platforms, but it's not going to be integrated that tightly with another CRM. So if you are a heavy use of Slack in your organization, well, it is going to be a time to see when this transition is going to happen and start figuring out when you are going to transition, and to what are the benefits that you get currently from a Slack versus other. If anything, I think this is an incredibly celebration day for Microsoft. You're mute, Francis, sorry.
Why is it a celebration for Microsoft?
Because what's going to happen when they tied up with Salesforce and Salesforce try to make people really keep on a Slack by using their platform is people is going to leave, and Google don't have yet a strong, chat, Hangout is not a competitor to Slack at this current version. The real solid competitor is Microsoft Teams.
You got it. Yeah, I think that this is really this is interesting on multiple different sides of this. One is, coming into the pandemic, Slack lost 40% of its valuation, and it was in the process of its IPO. So this was a little bit of a desperate space for Slack. I think that in a year or 2 years' time, if they weren't purchased by someone, Slack was you could ring the death toll because Slack would ultimately die out. They wouldn't die out in the classical sense. They die out the way social networks today die out. They get bought by some large conglomerate, and they slowly eke out every efficiency. And eke it out for every dollar, and ultimately it dies by virtue of having a name but being basically a skeleton of its former self. The goal here, though, I think for Slack is to be able to stay independent long enough to keep its users using it while the integration happens. So I think Salesforce is probably going to be like LinkedIn to Microsoft, where LinkedIn kept everything intact and they really tried to not let people know that, hey, by the way, behind the scenes, everything is going to start to be Azure connected, and slowly but surely we're going to put in all of the Microsofty parts, and you're going to see tighter integration over time. That's going to happen. The Salesforceification of Slack is going to happen, but they're going to try and do it very, very slowly, I presume, over time, so that just like a frog boiling in the water, if you just raise the temperature very slowly over time, they won't.
I don't know. I don't know, because they can integrate that communication immediately into Salesforce, and we'll have more seats than what they're going to lose. So Art is saying just wait until Salesforce try to improve the UI on a Slack, and that's exactly what I think is going to happen. But
I mean, reality is that Slack already integrates fairly well with Salesforce. I mean, they have an integration, they connect, they do everything I can think of Salesforce doing with Slack reasonably right now. And so the real purchase here was the user base, right? Salesforce was buying a user base, and that's pretty much it.
Yes and no. The user base, but I think more than the user base, sorry, Francis, more than the user base, it's also the fact that now they can have this external app that is going to be approved for communication, because the communication inside of Salesforce is not great. But for a lot of companies, even that they integrate means another app to approve. Now it comes with this software package. So for them, probably was cheaper to buy than develop, speed-wise and return-wise.
I could buy those benefits. I don't see $27 billion of value in solving any of the problems that we've talked about so far. I don't get the 27 billion at all. When I read it, it boggled my mind. I read a little bit about it, but I couldn't understand where $27 billion could be allocated to solving the problems that they're, I guess, gonna solve by putting the two together. It just didn't add up at all for me. Like, way off. And if it's gonna, as Ray said, if it was gonna pass out in 2 years' time, then you spent $27 billion to get a bunch of people who aren't salespeople to use Salesforce. But
if you have if you have a lot of folks who are interfacing with the sales team and you need that tighter integration, I can see here them converting to customers over time. So actually, Art is noting this, that Slack customers are potential Salesforce customers, and I absolutely agree here. I think that they bought a user base, and in essence, over time, they want to slowly but surely turn up the heat until some of those people become Salesforce customers, and the rest of them can stay happily in the Slack environment until they ultimately either die out or migrate to other platforms. That's just a natural point of reference here that I think is makes sense in the grander logic of things. I'm with you, Francis, though. I am boggled at the $27.7 billion price point. But they know things we don't know, right? So it could be things about the code base or the talent that they acquired in the purchase that really made them jump up that number. So I don't want to cast aspersions where I don't have enough data to know this. They're now a public company, so we will see all of this in some way, shape, or form in the future, and I will be interested in diving into this more deeply, because this really has a profound effect on the productivity app marketplace, and it is something that companies like Evernote, which at one time had very deep integration with Salesforce and has other integrations with many other tools, I'm fascinated by how these companies play each other in order to be able to gain greater user adoption and otherwise. I've said this multiple times, and I really felt like Evernote's integration with Salesforce was their strongest angle at building a stronger connection to Microsoft and building their user base that way, right? Because greater integration with Salesforce has deep integration with LinkedIn, Salesforce, Evernote, more users. And so I saw a lot of opportunity there, and things changed, and Evernote had to rewrite their applications. So obviously that got put on the back burner. LinkedIn was purchased by Microsoft. All of these things kind of happen in real time. So, but Slack here, I don't see them as that grand of a challenger to Teams in the long run, and so I think I'm going to stand on the side of nothing's necessarily going to change productivity-wise for a lot of folks who weren't using Slack and were Salesforce users. But for those who are Slack users and now Salesforce coming onto the pike becomes something distasteful to them, and then there's a change, right? Management decides we want to integrate more tightly with, say, Copper or with another, CRM, and they want to move away from Slack, then we should all be kind of mindful of that. If you're in that situation and you're watching or listening, start to think about what that transition looks like for your company and how that's going to impact your productivity. Even if it's going to another chat platform, that still requires some level of transition process, and you need to think that through. Final thoughts, gentlemen, on Slack being purchased by Salesforce for $27.7 billion.
Yeah.
If I'd heard $3 billion, I would have said, all right, 27 billion is
Pocket change, yeah. Yeah, and I don't use either one. Of course, I'm familiar with Slack, but don't use it on a regular basis. Don't use Salesforce at all, so I really don't have much in the way to
Not to worry. I mean, there's just there's a lot here in the productivity ecosystem, and what I consistently try to remind myself is that productivity is a vague term to the point where it encompasses a lot of different ecosystems that are blended together. And so some of us may use different parts, and some of us may not use complete components of the ecosystem by virtue of the way in which we work. So this has been a wonderful conversation, and I thank you, gentlemen, for it. That takes us to some announcements and then closing out. I just wanted to make a quick announcement that I put out today. As some of you watching may know, or some listening may know, I run a podcast and a virtual book club called Productivity Book Group. And today I announced, and if you're listening to the podcast yesterday, I announced we're going to be doing a group reading and discussion of Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity, the March 2015 edition. And we are going to, in essence, be reading the book by David Allen. We're going to be starting on January 7th, 2020. And so we're going to run for 4 different sessions. So every other week, every 2 weeks, 4 sessions on those Thursday afternoons, at least Eastern time. If you go to productivitybookgroup.org/community, you will join the online community for Productivity Book Group and see the events there. So you have to join Productivity Book Group's community in order to access the event. It's free, but it's all there in there. I just don't want to have to manage it in other places. So you're going to have to join the community. You can leave afterward. But if you go to productivitybookgroup.org/community, you can find all the details there. And you can read along with us and implement GTD if you are interested. And so with that, we've covered all the productivity and technology news this week we could cover. And so thank you all for being with us this week. I want to give an opportunity to our panelists to tell us where we can find them. We'll start with you, Dr. Buck. Dr. Buck, where can we keep in touch with you and learn more about you?
Okay, come over to my website, .org, which you see there.
Frank, want to say that one more time.
frankbuck.org, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Dr. Frank Buck.
Dr. Frank Buck. Easy as pie. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. All and right. Thank you for joining us as always, Frank.
It's a pleasure.
Francis, where can folks keep up with you and learn more about you?
TimeBlockingSummit.info is the sort of what I'll be focusing on in the productivity space for the next 3 months. And I'm also at Twitter at 2Time Labs.
The number 2.
That's fine. The number 2, TIMELABS. And I think it's the same on Instagram. Could be.
Wonderful.
One of those.
Thanks for joining us here on Anything But Idle, Francis.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. All right, Augusto. And then there were 2. Thank you so much, Augusto Pinaud, for joining me as always as my co-host here for Anything But Idle.
Thank you very much. And, now there is 1. No, we're still 2.
All right, everybody. If there was a story we missed, feel free to head over to anythingbutidle.com. There on the contact page, you can go ahead and either comment on the episode page. We have comment section open, but you could also contact us on the contact page. You can always tweet or DM us at anythingbutidle on Twitter. And so we have the direct messages open for you to be able to do that. If you have a question or comment about anything we discussed during the show, anythingbutidle.com. That's pretty much the place where you can find us. While you're on anythingbutidle.com, we do have show notes with links to all the stories, tools of the week, you name it, even some extra stories once in a while. Those are all linked there on anythingbutidle.com on the episode page. We also have a machine-generated transcript, so if you want to read and download that in PDF, you can go ahead and do that. The text is on the page. Just click on the Read More link, but we also have a PDF that you can download and read that there. If this is your first time watching the live stream, feel free to click on the thumbs up icon. That helps us to grow our listening and watching community live, and so thank you for doing that. You can also click the subscribe button. You'll be notified of future live streams for that. If you are listening to the podcast, feel free to go to anythingbutidle.com and click on subscribe, and you learn how to access the free subscription to the podcast in your favorite podcast app of choice. And so go ahead and do that. You can also leave a rating or review. So if you're listening to the podcast, ratings and reviews in Apple Podcasts and Stitcher help us to grow our personal productivity listening community. And so thank you for doing that. With that, see you all next time on Anything But Idle. Here's to your productive life. Take care, everybody.